Hello and welcome to the first of two videos about the parts of the brain. This first video is going to be some discussion of the different ways that we use to study the brain, so different imaging techniques, and then also we will look at the bottom of the brain, the most primitive parts of the brain. These are the parts of the brain that other animal species also share for the most part. So these are going to control that very basic functioning. Humans have evolved to develop more higher order thinking, and that is a different part of the brain that we're going to talk about in a later video. So let's get started. These first techniques that we're going to talk about, you might just want to write in some free space that you have on your notes or in a piece of loose leaf because there's not any space for you to write this on your video note sheet. But the first is a brain lesion. Brain lesions were the very first type of techniques that were used to study the different parts of the brain. And what it is they actually go in and experimentally destroy the brain tissue. Usually it's burned or cauterized. And then those are done in order to compare how was behavior before they did the lesion, how was behavior done after. Usually it's done for scientific or medicinal purposes, but sometimes it happens because of trauma to the brain. For example, we would lesion someone's brain potentially to help them if they're suffering from epilepsy or seizures. The next is an electroencephalogram or an EEG. This is where they put different electrodes all over your head, and then they are actually measuring the electrical waves that are going from one part of your brain to another. They want to see what parts of your brain are active at what time when you are actually answering questions or doing some sort of processing technique. MRI scans are the next, a magnetic resonance image, and this is using magnetic fields and radio waves to give us an image that looks somewhat like an X-ray, except it's looking at soft tissue and not at bone. So we can look at the different structures of the brain. It's mainly used to see if a structure in the brain is damaged, if it's missing, if it's too big, too small, etc., etc. Next is an fMRI, which is a functional MRI. And what's cool with this is they actually can see the activity in the brain, the blood flow that is happening while they are getting an image of the brain. So when someone is functioning, so usually they'll have an intercom or a visual projection that someone will be looking at, and then they're responding to questions about those things. And we can see where the patient's brain is lit up during a specific function. A PET scan or a positron emission tomography is similar in that it's showing us blood flow, metabolic processes. So what happens is they get, the patient ingests or is injected with a radioactive form of glucose, and then the PET scan takes pictures of it being used in the brain. So you can see over here the different parts of the brain. When a brain is resting, it's going to be a lot of these cooler colors, blues and greens. And then when it is in the middle of doing something, you'll see the different parts of the brain that are responsible for that function light up a different color. They turn a hotter color, right? So red, orange, etc. Next is a CAT scan or a CT scan. It's a computerized tomography, and basically it's a series of X-ray images that are taken, and it gives us cross-sectional images of the brain or the body. And so we're getting these little slices of the brain. Think of like if you have your whole brain here, they're going to be taking little slices all the way up to see different parts of the brain, to see different levels of where your brain is. Okay, so let's start looking at the different structures in the brain. We're going to be again looking at the old brain. So these are going to be structures that are basic functioning. Okay, so our very first is actually not part of the old brain. It's the higher order functioning. It's the cerebral cortex. So this is the part of the brain up here that like wrinkly, mushy, I kind of looks like guts, right? Like your intestines. That is what controls our higher order functioning. So that's going to be our thinking, our processing of information that comes in. That we are going to talk about in a later video. So let's get on to some of these older parts. So the first is kind of hard to see in a 2D image. It's better to look at from above or from below, but the corpus callosum is the first section right here. It is located between our two hemispheres. It's the fibers that connect the two hemispheres. So we can think of our brain as actually two separate brains in our head that are then connected down at the bottom here by fibers that allow communication from one side to another. That is the corpus callosum. So if the corpus callosum is cut, we now separate the brain. Okay. The next is the cerebellum. The cerebellum's nickname is little brain. This is attached to the brainstem. So this down here is our spine, and then it turns into our brainstem as we come up into the brain. And this little part back here is known as the cerebellum. It's known as the little brain because it looks like just a miniature brain. And this is helping us coordinate our voluntary movements or our balance. So dancers or gymnasts are going to have a very strong cerebellum. So that's this section back here. The next is the thalamus. Our thalamus is located inside our older brain here, so in the very middle. The thalamus is our sensory control center. So when we use our senses, so for example, you are using your eyes to look at this video right now, when that light is hitting our eyes, that image goes through our eyes and directly to the thalamus. The thalamus then the one that says, hey, guess what? This is an image. I need to send this to the part of the brain that is going to process seeing, our sight. Okay, so it sends it then to the occipital lobe. So the thalamus is the first stop for any sensory information that comes in. The next is the hypothalamus. Hypo means under, okay, so it's underneath the thalamus. The hypothalamus is going to control our innate drives. This is going to be our hunger, our thirst, our breathing, and our sex drive. Okay, so it's going to control those basic innate drives that we have. Underneath the thalamus is our pituitary gland. Okay, the pituitary gland is a very small little gland here. It is the master gland, remember, of the endocrine system. It is going to control all of the other glands in the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is controlled by the hypothalamus. Okay, so it is right underneath it. This is the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Next, we have our pons. The pons is this big hump right here that is on the brain stem. The pons is controlling our breathing, but also our sleep stages. So it determines what stage of sleep we are in, if you're going to be dreaming or not. Next is the medulla that is underneath the pons. Our medulla does our heartbeat and our breathing. So if you were to damage your medulla, you would not be able to survive because your body would not be controlling your heartbeat or your breathing. Behind the medulla on the very back is a finger-like structure. Okay, it is attached to the brainstem. Our reticular activating system or our reticular formation is going to control things like our alertness. So they are helping you stay awake during the day. If someone says your name, this is going to be what's activated so that you turn and face that person. It also keeps us awake during the day and allows us to wake up in the morning. And then finally, we have our spinal cord here, which again is the second part of the CNS, the central nervous system. And this is remember, the highway that goes from our brain to the rest of the neurons in our body. Okay, the pons, the medulla, and the reticular activating system or the reticular formation form our brainstem. And the brainstem is the oldest part of the brain. The brainstem is the first thing that gets developed when a fetus is growing, and it does our automatic survival functions, right? So all of these things, we wouldn't be able to survive with any of these parts of our brain are damaged. Okay, let's talk about the limbic system. Some of these parts we've already talked about, but we're going to talk about them a little bit differently. Our limbic system controls things like our emotion, our behavior, the motivations we have, our learning, and our memory. So these are going to do some higher order things, but again, they're basic functions, right? So we have our limbic system on both sides of the thalamus. So we have two sets of each of these structures, okay? So here's our thalamus. It is split down the middle. We just have one thalamus. It is split then in this picture, and then we have two different structures of each of these. Our hippocampus is going to control things like our memories. So when we get new memories, it's going to process those memories that are coming in, okay? Our amygdala is next. Our amygdala is going to control those very extreme, basic emotions that we have, things like fear, anger, aggression, okay? Those are going to be part of the limbic system, but our limbic system also includes our hypothalamus, which we have talked about already. Our hypothalamus, again, is going to control those innate drives, our sex drive, our hunger, our thirst. There are two different parts of the hypothalamus, and I want you to know these two. The first is the ventromedial hypothalamus. Ventromedial starts with a V, so that would be a good way to remember that is the word vomit. You won't write that in FRQ, but it could help you remember. Our ventromedial hypothalamus is going to tell us when to stop eating. If you don't stop eating, you're going to vomit, okay? And then the other part of the hypothalamus is the lateral hypothalamus, and that is going to tell you when you are hungry. So it's going to tell you, hey, let's eat, right? Let's eat is L for lateral. So here's another perspective of the limbic system. So we have our hypothalamus here. Remember we said we have the ventromedial hypothalamus as well as the lateral. We have our amygdala down here, which is going to be an almond shape. That is going to control our fear, aggression, and then our hippocampus, which is down here, which is going to be our memory center. And then up here we can see the thalamus. Again, we have just one thalamus, and it's going to control our sensory information. We can see the corpus callosum is this orange piece connecting those two hemispheres of the brain. And then we also have our cingulate gyrus, and that's on top of the corpus callosum, and that is going to be involved with processing some emotions, regulating our behavior, as well as some other automatic motor functions. So in our next section, we'll discuss the higher functioning area of the brain known as the cerebral cortex. So we'll do that in our next video.